right, let's get this going. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to a new thing. And we are in an election week. So, that's what I was going to be talking about. I actually thought about considering kind of doing a clickbait thing where I was like, oh, we're going to talk about election and then just talk about predestination and election. Um, but I figured that would be a little too much, a little too rude of me to do that. And yeah, so we are going to talk about the election, which happened earlier this week, and what it not what it means. I'm not going to talk about politics in the sense of what it means for the United States, things like that. That's not really what this is about. I think what's more important is how we as Christians view the election. And the nice thing about this is I can give this teaching every 4 years and it always stays fresh. So I never have to overly prepare everything, which is great. Basically, though, just like my initial thoughts, and this isn't even like a crazy thing or whatever, but I am somewhat heartened. I think I feel like the response to the election has not been as visceral as the last two were. Now, of course, like I say that, but you never know, right? We're what, like 2 days away, or 2 days removed, not even fully, like a day and a half, right? So watch, I'll say that, and then something will happen. Anyway, everyone can blame me, but I feel like people aren't losing their minds in the way that they have been in the past, which is good. Although idols have still been smashed, and that's good as well. Although not all of them, for sure. So first things first. What we're gonna do is this is Bible Day, so we're gonna just look at the Bible. I don't have any other fun stuff planned, but I think that the overall structure is going to be: here is a general statement, important reminder, and then I have a message to the people who consider themselves the losers. Now, I'm not talking about Kamala Harris, right? Like, I'm talking about people who are supporting her. Like, you think your side, the person, the candidate, even if it might not be a side, right? But the candidate you supported lost. How to feel about that, right? And so we're going to look at the Bible a little bit there. And then I also have a message for those who won, right, where their candidate won as well, and how to feel about that. All right, so firstly, let's open up our Bibles here. I'm going to pull up our Bible here. It's going to look a little small at first, so I apologize about that. My OBS, which is the system that I used to do these types of things, is on the fritz a little bit. So here we go. Perfect. All right, so first thing we're going to be looking at is Psalm 146. So you can see it right there. Praise the Lord. It says, praise the Lord, my soul. I will praise the Lord all my life. I will sing praise to my God as long as I live. Do not put your trust in princes, in human beings who cannot save. When their spirit departs, they return to the ground. On that very day, their plans come to nothing. Blessed are those whose help is the God of Jacob, whose hope is in the Lord their God. He is the maker of heaven and earth, the sea and everything in them. He remains faithful forever. He upholds the cause of the oppressed and gives food to the hungry. The Lord sets prisoners free. The Lord gives sight to the blind. The Lord lifts up those who are bowed down. The Lord loves the righteous. The Lord watches over the foreigner and sustains the fatherless and the widow, but he frustrates the ways of the wicked. The Lord reigns forever. Your God, O Zion, for all generations. Praise the Lord. I love this psalm. It's the best psalm to think about when talking about politics because of verse 3, right, where it says, "Do not put your trust in princes." That is what we do, right? That is at the heart the idolatry of politics, is that we think that if our candidate wins, if we win, then everything will be right in the world, and people will say this sort of garbage, right? Which is not true. It might be better, right? Certainly, as someone who has seen great election wins and positives come from that, and also great election losses and very negative things come from that, I get it, right? I get that there is this temptation to think that if we have our person in power, we are saved, right? And this is not true. One of the powerful things about this psalm and why it continually challenges us, even today, right, is that we so often think that it's princes, it's government, it's the people above that are the ones capable of doing all the things that God does here in 6 through 9, right? It's the point of this psalm is you start by, it's a contrast, right? There's the king or the prince who is the one that is usually in the ancient world a subject of adoration and even worship. You think people worship political leaders today. You don't quite see it in the same way that you do in the ancient world. I would agree with you, by the way, but not in the same way, right? We don't see them as literal avatars of God or avatars of the gods, in the sense that people in the ancient world saw their rulers much of the time, like the pharaohs of Egypt, for example. And oftentimes we can put our trust in these people, whether we think they're divine or not, because they're the ones who hold the power. And we think that they're the ones who can do all these things. But you'll notice a lot of the things in 6 through 9 are things that we expect government and princes to do. But who's the one who's actually doing it, right? Who's the one who upholds the cause of the oppressed? Who's the one who gives food to the hungry? Who sets prisoners free? Who gives sight to the blind? Who lifts up those who are bowed down? Who loves the righteous? Who watches over the foreigner and sustains the fatherless and the widow and frustrates the way of the wicked, right? It's not the president. It's not the government. It's God. Now, of course, we understand that these tools are used to do these things, and praise God for that. We're going to see that talked about in a little bit. But if we get our system messed up, our priorities messed up, we begin to think the prince is doing these things and not God, who is above him. And that is the great idolatry of politics. So this happens on both the left and the right. Okay, in the United States, it's what they want you to do. It's why every election is the most important election in the world. It's why they say if you elect us, things will be better, and if we don't get in, they'll be worse. That's what it's all about. All right, that is the point: is to make you trust in them rather than in God. Doesn't mean that they can't be right about these things. Doesn't mean that things that might not even improve with certain people in power. Right. The whole point of it, though, is that you need to not see it as, oh, my world crumbles if my side doesn't win, or my world crumbles, or it's all over if my side doesn't win, right? That's not true. It's not all over. And I hate to tell you this, but, and I have to say this again, and I'm going to call on Augustine here, right? Augustine of Hippo, great theologian, writing at the fall of the Roman Empire, right? And I no disrespect to the United States, but like, one lost election in the United States is not the end of the world, in the same way that the fall of Rome was to those who were living in it at the time. And Augustine during that time says, listen, guys, there's a heavenly city, there's a heavenly kingdom of which we are going to, and there's an earthly city. And God can use whatever earthly city he wishes to do his power, right? But the earthly city does not dictate, the fate of humanity. Rome rises when God pleases it to, and Rome falls when God pleases it to. And you need to be comfortable with that. The idolatry of politics will take you away from that truth, and that is bad. All right? And that's a message to everyone. Now, I'm going to turn here. We're going to look at two passages of the Bible for people who consider themselves the people that lost this election, or their candidate lost this election, or even if you don't want to say that, maybe you're unhappy with the results, right? So these are two important passages that we have to remember all the time, and both of them have to do with how we should feel about the government. And this is an important thing to remember, because this is of course, I like to put it as the losers of this election and the winners, and not Democrats and Republicans, because this is very much a problem whenever there's an election that doesn't swing people's way, right? People immediately go to, oh, I'm not going to respect the government or the new president or anything like that. Doesn't matter what side you're on, right? We've seen this literally happen in the last two elections, so from opposite sides of the spectrum. So it doesn't really shock any of us, right? But if we're going to look at it, we're going to look at Romans 13, 1 through 7 first. This is Paul writing in Romans, and he says, "Let everyone be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except that which God has established. The authorities that exist have been established by God. Consequently, whoever rebels against the authority is rebelling against what God has instituted, and those who do so will bring judgment on themselves. For rulers hold no terror for those who do right, but for those who do wrong. Do you want to be free from fear of the one in authority? Then do what is right, and you will be commended. For the one in authority is God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong, be afraid, for rulers do not bear the sword for no reason. They are God's servants, agents of wrath to bring punishment on the wrongdoer. Therefore, it is necessary to submit to authorities, not only because of possible punishment, but also as a matter of conscience. This is also why you pay taxes, for the authorities are God's servants who give their full time to governing. Give to everyone what you owe them. If you owe taxes, pay taxes. If revenue, then revenue. If respect, then respect. If honor, then honor." Now, everyone, when they say this, they immediately go to like the Nazis, right? They immediately go to the most extreme example, but that is an extreme example, and we're not going to go there. What we're going to do is we're going to actually live in the world that Paul was at the time when he wrote this, because it was at this time that Christians were being rounded up by authorities in towns, and Paul himself was in prison for spreading the gospel message, right? He is going to be killed in Rome. He writes this letter ahead of time. It's probably the last letter that Paul writes, a lot of people believe, right? So if we're going to look at this and we're going to talk about this seriously, we have to understand like that Paul himself is being punished by the authorities, right? He thinks that's wrong. He thinks that shouldn't be happening, but he is commending Christians not to rebel against Rome, to not show honor to the emperor, to not show honor to governors and leaders, right? They're supposed to carry themselves in a way that doesn't bring down the authorities on them, right? Paul is very understanding that sometimes to do the right thing, you have to make the government your enemy, right? But you shouldn't view them that way, even if they're coming down on you, right? You still have to respect them as government is being instituted by God for the well-being of society. You're gonna like pay attention to a lot of this idea of them being agents of God or instituted by God or tools of God, because this is going to come up later. But we have to remember this, right? So if you are a person on the side that is unhappy, or your candidate lost or whatever, right? You don't get to turn around and not show respect or authority or anything like that to the people that are now in charge. Doesn't mean you have to agree with everything they do. Doesn't mean you have to bow down and just say whatever they say is right. Right? That's not what Paul is saying. But like, if you want to do what is the Christian thing to do, you hope and pray that they do the right thing. And you call to attention when that isn't the case, but you don't rebel or fight against them for the sake of the fight, right? Because at that point, what are you loyal to? You're loyal to your own political ideals over what God tells you to do. And of course, people do that. And again, this is from 1 Peter 2:12. I feel like they knew that we would have such a problem with this sometime in the future, and Christians did, right? You can actually go through the centuries and see this pop up again and again and again. But here's what Peter says in his first letter. He says, "Live such good lives among the pagans that though they accuse you of doing wrong, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day he visits us. Submit yourselves for the Lord's sake to every human authority, whether to the emperor as the supreme authority or to governors who are sent by him to punish those who do wrong and to commend those who do right. For it is God's will that by doing good you should silence the ignorant talk of foolish people. Live as free people, but do not use your freedom as a cover-up for evil. Live as God's slaves. Show proper respect to everyone. Love the family of believers. Fear God. Honor the emperor." So you have Peter here giving instructions to the people that he's writing to. And again, you'll see some noticeable similarities to Paul, right? Paul says that people should live in a way that doesn't bring the government down on them. Peter says the very same thing in that first verse. And he says you should submit yourselves to authorities, right? Again, what this means from Peter's perspective is that the government has been established to punish wrong and commend those who do right. Does it do this well all the time? No, right? But the general tenor of a Christian should be to respect authority, to respect government, and to uh, uh, and to do what is right. You know, that's really the whole idea here. Live as a free people, but don't use your freedom as a cover up for evil, right? Don't use your Christian faith to cover up evil. Don't use it as an excuse to do things that you know are wrong, right? Show respect to everyone. Love the family of believers. Fear God. Honor the emperor. And again, all of this is being said while there's persecution of Christians going on. This isn't written hundreds of years later when Christians are in charge, trying to get people to do what they want them to do. Right? This is written during a time when Christians are being actively persecuted by the state, and they're still being told to honor the emperor, who's doing it to them. Right? That's how radical this is. That's how much of a full and total vision Christians have of government. Right? A complete vision that yes, the government is good, but it can be used by bad people to do bad things. But still, we honor the people that are a part of it, and by doing so, bring honor to Christ and win people to our side. Right? He says that they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day He visits us. Right? It's our humility in this that actually is a great challenge to people. And think about that in the United States today. Right? Think about how that humility is such a challenge to people who put their stock in politics. Right? That you just they're like, well, I'm going to trust God in this process, and it'll make some people mad. Like people will actually be upset that you do that, right? But you got to just do it, and you'll be better off for it. It gives you a longer perspective, and you'll be healthier spiritually and probably physically too. It'll bring your heart rate down. All right, now that's for those who consider themselves the losers, or their candidate didn't lose, they didn't like it. Now I have a message for those who believed or that they won, or their candidate won, or excited about it. And this is God's judgment on Assyria from Isaiah 10, 5 through 12. So one of the things that when people's candidate wins, you'll often say he or she or whatever is God's choice, right? You'll see lots of Christians or people who claim to be Christians or even non-Christians say these types of things, right? God chose them. They're God's chosen one. That this is the chosen one of the people, right? Even if they don't use that sort of thing, or this is America's choice, right? The idea being behind that is, of course, that if a higher power or greater thing chose them, then that makes them the good or the better or whatever. One of the things to note, though, and this is important, is that God uses rulers, people that are sinful and broken and actually may deserve judgment themselves in order to fulfill His purposes, and then He brings judgment down on them. So one of the things that I like to always tell people is that if they ever say that they're God's chosen one or God chose me or whatever, is we always think that when God chooses you, that's a good thing. Like for you, it's always a good thing. God's willing His purposes out, right? And many times God does choose people. It does turn out for good. But God also chooses people and uses them in order to work good, even though they themselves are evil or bad and are brought into punishment. And this is why it's so important that we not view our leaders in this messianic way, right? That we understand that someone can be used to do good by God, but will also be punished for that. And I actually think that, like, this is, if you didn't have a candidate this election, you can easily see this in both of the candidates that we have, right? There might be things that you liked about both of them, might be things that you disliked generally about both of them, but one of them was going to win. One of them is going to be used by God, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's the, that they are somehow the one that God fully and totally approves of. And you're going to see this in God's judgment on Assyria here. Just a reminder, Assyria is an ancient empire in the Middle East. It's in what is now northern day Iraq, and it is kind of the big bad guy on the block in the time that Isaiah is writing this. They are actually going to besiege Jerusalem. They destroy the northern kingdom of Israel or Samaria, which you'll see talked about here. And they also are the people that Jonah is sent to prophesy to. And they are very, very, very violent. They are particularly known for their impaling of people and their harsh treatment of people who rebel against them. So they are very much not a good nation, if you want to think about it that way, right? Now, are they? What I would say, are they particularly worse than anyone else? Maybe in some ways, yes, but no, all nations are deeply flawed, right? But let's just look at this. So this is God speaking through the prophet Isaiah. He says, "Woe to the Assyrian, the rod of my anger, in whose hand is the club of my wrath." Stop. Okay. So what does God say about the Assyrian? He says, "Woe to them." But what does he say about them? He says that they're the rod of his anger, and in the Assyrian's hand is the club of God's wrath. Okay? All right. "I sent him against a godless nation. I dispatch him against the people who anger me, to seize loot and snatch plunder, and to trample them down like mud in the streets." But this is not what he intends. This is not what he has in mind. His purpose is to destroy, to put an end to many nations. "Are not my commanders all kings?" he says. "Has not Calno fared like Carchemish? Has not Hamath like Arpad, and Samaria like Damascus? As my hand seized the kingdoms of the idols, kingdoms whose image excelled those of Jerusalem and Samaria, shall I not deal with Jerusalem and her images, as I dealt with Samaria and her idols?" So God is speaking through the prophet Isaiah, and he says that the Assyrian is going to be the rod of his anger. He's going to use Assyria to bring justice down on Jerusalem and Samaria, right? That is the purpose of the Assyrians. He's going to bring them, and he's going to use them to bring his justice down on Samaria, and he's going to do that, right? Because they have idols. They're going to come here. They're going to seize loot and snatch plunder and trample it down like mud in the streets, right? But the interesting thing is that this is not what Assyria intends to do, right? They are not intending to be used by God as a judgment against this people, right? This wicked people. They just want to come and destroy and conquer, right? And he puts words, he uses there's a Syrian that talks, and he says, all my kings are commanders, right? They're good warriors, right? And then it names all the cities that they've conquered, Damascus, and all these other towns that were in the northern part of Israel, like Samaria, that have been destroyed, right? That they've seized the kingdoms of idols, and they were much better than Jerusalem and Samaria, right? They've conquered places way more important than that, right? And it says, "Shall I not deal with Jerusalem and her images as I dealt with Samaria and her idols?" So God here is distinguishing between the fact that the Assyrians are being used by him as an instrument of justice, even though they are completely unaware of it, right? Then in verse 12, you see this: "When the Lord had finished all his work against Mount Zion and Jerusalem, he will say, I will punish the king of Assyria for the willful pride of his heart and the haughty look in his eyes." And it continues to go on and talk about that. But what I want to point out there is, for those who believe that they won, or that their candidate is the chosen instrument of God, that's very well possible, right? That God could have uplifted someone to victory to fulfill his will. In fact, that's what I think happens in every election, right? Now, what that will means does not mean that it necessarily is a good thing in the long run for that person, or a good thing in the long run for the nation, right? What it means is that that God is working out his purposes and still holds the people he uses responsible for their sin, right? Assyria is going to attack Jerusalem as part of God's plan. Does that mean that Assyria gets away with doing this, even though they're, being used by God? No, right? They are still going to be punished for their arrogance, and for the destruction and evil that they have done. And this is important, right? This is important to remind ourselves of, and should cause us to have humility, right? And that's what both sides need to have in this. That's the running theme of this whole thing, right? Is humility, understanding that the people that we are talking about that are running are not the ones who are ultimately in charge, and that God's plans are not always our plans. And so we have to be able to, if something good happens, regardless if it was our candidate who did it or not, to be excited about it and praise that thing. And when they do bad, to hold them accountable and say that was bad, right? But still honor them as the leader and ruler of the United States. That's a tough tightrope to walk. It's not the fun thing to do, right? It certainly is more complicated, and we like more easy narratives of just saying this is our side is good, your side is bad, right? That's what they certainly want us to do. But we shouldn't do that, because that ends up harming our testimony and harming the church more than anything else, right? And so it's just important for us to remember that. So there you go. You got one, you got for those for, those against, and of course for everyone together. So I hope you guys found that interesting. This is something that is just, we have to continue revisiting. This is a big idolatry of our age, right? And so, check your heart, be humble, and continue on, because it's not the end of the world. It's not the beginning of a new and better era. The world is still sinful and broken, and full of troubles, and that's not going to change until Christ returns. So keep calm, carry on, all that good stuff. I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your Wednesday or Thursday, actually. It's like 7:30 in the morning, so I'm still waking up. Wonderful rest of your Thursday, and I'll see you on Sunday for worship. Peace out.